Just ahead on Black Issues Forum, how will Durham handle a disturbing spike in gun violence? And as public hearings on redistricting wrap up, our panel weighs in on our state's district lines and racial lines. Stay with us. Welcome to Black Issues Forum. I'm Deborah Holt-Noel. The past year has brought a wave of new gun-related violence to the city of Durham, and many have taken to the streets to protest. The most recent, a shooting near the campus of North Carolina Central University that resulted in the deaths of 2 young men. Neither one was connected with the university. It's led the chancellor, however, to join the chorus of groups demanding for a change. In 2020, 318 people were shot in Durham. That was nearly 70% more than the number shot in 2019. What do city leaders intend to do about this? I'd like to welcome to the forum District Attorney Satana Deberry, Durham City Councilman Mark-Anthony Middleton, and Attorney Harold Eustache of the Forsyth County GOP. Thank you so much for joining us. Councilman Middleton, how unique is this spike in violent crime to Durham, and do you feel safe in the city?
Well, first, of course, I feel safe in the city. As an elected official, I'm a brand ambassador, so I've drunk all the Kool-Aid about Durham. It's the second best place to live in the country, if you believe what you read. One of the highest per capita PhD rates in the country, best theater between Atlanta and New York. Durham is a fantastic place that people want to be, and I feel extremely safe, and that's not just because I'm a ninja. I'm safe because it's a safe place. And no, it's not unique to Durham. Nationwide, violent crime and gun violence is up. I do want to just clarify one statistic. You mentioned 2020. We're in 2021, and the last time our police reported statistics to us, gun incidents and the number of people shot in Durham are actually down from this time last year. However, the fatalities are about 37% higher, so more people are dying from their injuries this year.
It's still a big issue, though, correct?
Absolutely, absolutely. No, your primer was spot on. It's a big issue, and it's a tale of two cities. It exists right next to our narrative of excellence. We have an issue with gun violence in Durham. Absolutely.
And Harold, let me ask you, what do you think has contributed to this disturbing increase, or at least the large volume and also the death rate? How much of it do you attribute possibly to the pandemic?
Well, I think some of it's part of the pandemic, and some of it's kind of what happened in the last couple of years around policing. I think the interim police chief has kind of spoke about this in Durham, about how, they've had a problem retaining officers. There've been a lot of officers that left. There's sort of an employment problem there. And I think, when you don't have as many officers patrolling, it's taking longer for officers to respond to 911 calls. You kind of have a safety issue there. And I think that's not unique to Durham. I think that problem is happening all over the state and the country. So I think it kind of goes hand in hand with some of the problems we've had around retaining police officers for a myriad of reasons, be it officers wanting to leave because of COVID, because of mandates, or other things. I don't claim to know all the reasons, but that has been an issue. But I do think Durham's a good city. I mean, I spent 2 years of high school there at North Carolina Science and Math. I like the city a lot. It's a great place, but I think it's kind of like the other mid-sized cities in North Carolina, Winston-Salem and Greensboro. It's a challenge for all of them.
Absolutely. Well, you mentioned policing, and DA Deberry, in order to cope with the pandemic and overcrowding, one of the things that your office began was a pretrial release policy to try to keep individuals with lower level offenses out of jail. And I want to know, how has this helped? And also, has there been an increased need for policing?
Thanks, Deborah. Like Councilman Middleton, I am a big fan of the Bull City. I have children who go to school there. So it is really important to me that we're a safe place to be. And my office actually started this pretrial release policy pre-pandemic, so that we were really using our limited resources in the detention center to focus on people who were a danger to themselves and others. Over the pandemic, that took on a new urgency, because anytime you have people in a congregate care setting, they are much more challenged by COVID and any type of communicable disease. And so we've worked as a community to make sure that we are only detaining those people who are a danger, and that low-level offenders will come or given a bond and are assured that they come to court.
Is the public good with this? Are they concerned that there are more folks out who may need to still be in jail, and would this be contributing to the uptick in violence?
Yeah, there is absolutely no indication that it has contributed at all to any violence. Again, what we're talking about is people who are accused of misdemeanors or crimes that do not involve a human victim. People who have been accused of shooting or homicide certainly are detained in the Durham County Jail.
Well, it's certainly all about, right now making things safer. And Councilman Middleton, you attempted to get a gunshot surveillance equipment into the city. It failed. Can you talk about what happened there?
Sure. Well, first let me say in response to my good brother and friend Harold, I don't know that a fully staffed police department, that there's a correlation between lower gun violence and a police department at 100% staffing. If you look around the country, cities that aren't having an issue with staffing with police, I mean, gun violence is an American problem. We're the most heavily armed society on the face of the planet. There's more guns than people here, and there's no indication that we have higher degrees of mental illness in America either. So I just want to say that. Yes, I did try and get an experimental deployment of ShotSpotter. It's gunshot detection more so than surveillance. Part of the issue with the debate is that the technology was conflated with over-policing and a big brother syndrome by many folk. I think the debate was hijacked. When I first actually proposed it, it had nothing to do with violent crime. It had to do with the quality of life issue of unreported gunfire, which we have children jumping in bathtubs at night when it's not bath time. So as part of a comprehensive, multifaceted group of things that I propose to address gun violence in a city that has a demonstrated affinity for pilots, I believe in science. I recommended a pilot to get the data to see if it could perhaps help in a comprehensive strategy, and I believe the debate got hijacked. Interestingly enough, and I'll put a fine point here, many of the people that oppose ShotSpotter, we have video cameras going into all of our public housing complexes around the city. The internationally recognized symbol of surveillance is a video camera. So we won't try technology that could potentially save first responders to save people's lives, but we will spend money to get high-resolution videos of our victimization to go viral the next morning. I think we made the wrong decision.
Well, the mayor has proposed several different solutions, and when something like this happens, of course, people want to go straight to gun control. Harold, how much is gun control something that can be maintained or increased and effective in preventing some of these violent crimes?
I don't think it's effective at all. I think what gun control essentially means is taking, the guns away from law-abiding citizens. I think what we know is that a lot of the gun violence and the crimes, the guns that are used in these types of crimes are stolen weapons, or weapons that are on the street and not registered. And so, and I say this as a former prosecutor, I say this living in the world of criminal defense now, that's what I do. And I think the better way to do this is recruiting police officers, looking at schools like North Carolina Central and Shaw and other, schools in the area and saying, how do we incentivize and compel our best and brightest young people, particularly Black folks, to want to be police officers in cities like Durham, in cities like Winston-Salem, instead of having police officers in these cities that come from the outside counties. And I think that's just a big problem in a lot of these cities. So, not that those officers can't do a good job, but it would be good to have police officers that look like the community. And I think, and so instead of vilifying officers, I think part of the solution is not gun control, but really getting our police departments in a better way. Yeah.
DA Deberry, how about that solution? More police officers from the community, in communities, and gun control. What are your thoughts on those solutions and other solutions like root causes?
Yeah, I don't think lack of police patrols is our problem. We really know what causes gun violence. In Durham at Duke University, we have Phil Cook, who is a worldwide expert on gun violence. We know how to change things. We just lack the political will to do it. Research shows that we can identify somebody who is going to be involved as either a shooter or a victim in the 3rd grade. That's not about police. That's about providing economic opportunity to communities. That's about kids having opportunities outside of where they live. It's about neighborhoods that feel safe to the people who live in those neighborhoods. You know, we talk a lot about black people as defendants. The dirty little secret of the criminal justice system is that black people are also the victims. And really, that we want, everybody deserves to be safe. And one of the things that makes you safe is living in a community where you have opportunity, freedom of mobility, and the ability to do better. It's not necessarily about having more police patrolling. I think we live in a community like Durham that we have black people in power. Our former police chief was black. Our new police chief is a black woman. And so we are addressing those type of issues. I think now we are at a much more nuanced place where we really need to look about what we're providing to the people in our community as they grow up.
And everybody needs to be involved in identifying those solutions and being part of the solution themselves. Thank you. Over the past week, public hearings wrapped up on how North Carolinians' district maps will be drawn and where the lines will fall. Following the 2020 census, North Carolina gained a seat, giving our state 14 total. Early drafts of maps indicate that we could end up with anywhere from 9 to 11 Republican delegates and 3 to 5 Democrats. Some proposed maps are more evenly split, but we do know that Republicans hold the majority right now, and Governor Cooper has no veto power in this vote. Councilman Middleton, what are your thoughts on the process and the resulting maps so far?
You know, some time ago, a judge on the Fourth Circuit said that our maps in North Carolina were drawn with surgical precision to disenfranchise black folk in this state, whom I'd argue with the federal judge. These lines are drawn, and this is why we impress the importance or stress the importance of local elections. We tend to focus at the presidential level and national level, but at our state legislature, and local elections, that's where our lines are drawn for these maps. I think the math is compelling to us, and what's going on really here is some of my friends recognize the impact of the math of demographics. America is becoming more brown and less white, and there's been a backlash against that, and an attempt to codify that backlash into how we draw our maps. I think we have to be mindful that North Carolina is a state that's browning itself, and that our maps need to be reflective of folk. And you know, there are some things that are specifically troubling to me with some of my friends on the other side of the aisle. And I know Harold and I have discussed this before about this intentional attempt, whether it's racially motivated or not. The impact, the end result, seems to be skewed towards disenfranchising and suppressing black and brown voters in the state, and it's very troubling.
Well, let me get your thoughts on that, Harold. You know, Tony's talked about the browning of North Carolina, but what would you say about the red and blue kind of aspect of North Carolina? Some say we're purple, but, you know, where really are we? And how does that play with the browning of our state?
Well, here's where we are. You know, there's this notion that because the presidential elections in North Carolina are pretty close, they're 50-50, essentially, that our congressional line should be 50-50, meaning 7 and 7. The problem isn't the purple state or the browning of the North Carolina. The problem is that there are 100 counties in North Carolina, and over 80 of them are red. And so when you draw maps, they're drawn by geographic region. And the courts have said that we have to keep communities whole and keep communities of interest whole. And so when you attempt to do that, what you end up having is the maps, that the state legislature has put out. These maps are put out without taking race into account, without taking party into account, and trying to keep communities whole. And that's what the state legislature has done. This is not about disenfranchising minority voters at all. I think that the people on the left, they want to, that's always the argument, right? If they don't get their way, it must be some sort of racial intent. It's not. I think that, these maps are drawn fairly. In fact, there was a professor at Western Carolina who said, we challenged his students to draw a 7-7 map in North Carolina, and they couldn't do it without gerrymandering. They can't. I mean,
there's racial intent, and then there's racial effect. So sometimes it's not about your intention, but it's about the effect of the decisions. And, you're talking about the majority of our counties that are red, but those blue counties are densely populated. So there's a balance to be struck there, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that balance. I think, but part of the issue is if we don't, if we're going to have these maps that have these sort of snake districts, like the old 12th district used to be, which was drawn on racial lines, right? And so if we're going to have, if we're not going to, if we're going to get away from having those types of districts, then we're going to have these districts like the maps that we have now that kind of keep these areas whole. And we're going to have districts that, you know, are going to have 7 or 8 counties in them that are red. That's just sort of unavoidable based on the geography.
Well, we're going to talk a little bit about race in a second, but I want to get your feedback on this, DA Deberry. Your thoughts on how these maps are drawn?
Well, to say that anything in the United States does not have racial intent is to forget the whole history of the United States, and certainly to forget the history of us as a southern state. You know, I've lived in Durham County now for 2 decades. I've been in 3 congressional districts. The only thing that hasn't changed in those 20 years is me being black. And so it is very clear that that redistricting maps are being created across the country, not just in North Carolina, but to retain the power of a certain group of people. I think it's important to understand, and I think, Deborah, you brought this up, is that something like 70% of North Carolinians now live in an urban county, and the population is shifting. And so we should represent where the population is, not necessarily artificial geographic boundaries creating communities of interest, as Attorney Eustache said.
Well, there's more to be talked about on this subject. We are talking about redistricting, and an issue that is in play is the idea of racial polarization. Earlier in the year, before maps were drawn, GOP leaders adopted some rules of play. One of them was that racial data could not be used as a determinant in drawing the lines. Makes sense, right? Well, that rule was based on the belief that voters don't vote on candidates according to the race of the candidate. This local rule runs counter to a long-standing U.S. policy that requires the purposeful drawing of majority-minority districts, or districts where a racial minority group or groups comprise a majority of the district's total population, in order to ensure a certain number of seats for black politicians. Here in North Carolina, 4 out of every 10 voters are non-white. Only 2 districts have black representatives, G.K. Butterfield in District 1 and Alma Adams in District 12. Both districts are majority-minority drawn districts. Councilman Middleton, what is the difference between using racial data to draw district lines that could ensure that there's some black representation or minority representation in the U.S. House of Representatives and illegal racial gerrymandering?
It's a difference between using a knife as a surgeon or as a serial killer. One is to repair, one is to do harm. You know, let's be clear. The head of the party that many of my friends are in, the GOP party, started his career with a racist lie, and is ending his career by suggesting that the American electorate system is tainted, that an election was stolen. And much of that is being done on the back of minority, black and brown people in this country. And I say to my friends all the time, you know, on the other side of the aisle, it's highly more likely that I voted for many more white people than you have black people in the course of my career. Unscientific, but I'm certain that that's the case. Yeah, so the notion that to repair is now the harm, and to fix the harm is somehow doing further harm is part of the psychoses of racism, of systemic racism in this country, where black is white and math isn't math anymore. Apparently math is now part of critical race theory, so we can't talk about the fact that, you know, elections were won and math still works and numbers are numbers. So I'm deeply concerned by it. I'm deeply concerned by it, and I hope that my friends on the other side will take their party back, which has become unrecognizable.
Well, Harold, let's get your feedback on that. Seems like
I think first we talk about how we got here, about as far as race being taken into account with redistricting. Well, the issue is that the court said, because of what Councilman Middleton sort of brought up in the last segment about, you know, surgical precision, the court said, well, take race out of it. And that was in response to what some of the folks in the Democratic Party wanted. So that's why that's happened. 2, I take an issue with you know, some in the other party saying that, you know, the GOP won't vote for blacks, or that I don't understand that. The reality in North Carolina is the Republican, and in the South, the Republican Party has been better at putting Black people in positions of power than the Democratic Party, without question. We look at our first lieutenant governor who won a primary against 8 white people, in North Carolina. He won that primary. We look at South Carolina, it has Senator Tim Scott won a statewide election. We look at Kentucky and Daniel Cameron, who won a statewide election. And then we look at North Carolina and say the Democratic Party hasn't had, a Black senator, hasn't had a Black governor, hasn't had a Black attorney general. So all these folks, you talk about 40% of the state, and really 60% of Democrats being voters of color. Well, what's the show for it? I mean, it's perplexing to me that this folks just keep voting over and over, and as Councilman Middleton said, for white candidates.
Is this about skin color, though, or about principles and policies? Councilman Middleton, you wanted to jump in?
I'm sorry. I never said that the GOP doesn't elect Black folk. I said that just unscientifically. I'm sure that I voted for more white people than individual members of the GOP have voted for Black people over the course of their voting life. And there's all kinds of reasons for that, but I never suggested that the GOP does not elect Black people. I have friends of the GOP that are elected officials.
Well, in terms of looking out for the interests of minority communities, does it matter what the skin color of the candidate is? Let me get your thoughts on this, D.A. Deberry.
Well, I think what matters is the experience of that candidate. And there's certain experiences that certainly we on this panel share as Black people that white people do not share in this country. That does not mean that a white candidate cannot look out for the interests of minority people. It just means that we are a diverse electorate, and we should be represented by a diverse group of people. And I think that is always what certainly I believe, and I think that is what most Black Americans believe, is we don't all agree on anything. Right, the three of us on this panel, Councilman Middleton and I are very good friends and very much aligned, and we can probably find many, many ways in which we disagree. And so I think better governance comes from having a diverse group of people making the decisions.
And when you consider the demographics of North Carolina, it is browning. There's a significant increase in the number of Latino residents here in our state, but there's only one Latino representative in our legislature. Councilman Middleton?
Oh, precisely. And listen, the math is compelling, and our friends in the other party, they read demographical trends and they understand what's happening, and power is a very appealing and addictive drug. And we've seen a concerted, systemic, scientific effort, pseudoscientific effort to suppress that and disenfranchise. Why would a legislature want the power to overturn an election, or the power to review elections that have been certified and recertified and validated by folk even in their own party that say that they're valid? Why would you want that power? What are you expecting? What are you anticipating? What are you setting the board up for? It is clear. It is regressive. It is a threat, an imminent threat to the very fabric of our democracy, and we need to be on guard as we move forward.
Harold, well, how would you respond to that?
I'll respond to that by saying, part of the reason that these state legislatures need to look at these elections is because we've had a board of elections in North Carolina and Pennsylvania and other states that usurped the legislature, went around the legislature and created laws at the 11th hour, especially in 2020, and changed the voting laws while people are voting.
There was a pandemic in place, and so there was unique need to make some changes.
There's also no evidence really that happened.
Well, that absolutely happened in North Carolina. Without question, laws were changed. It's uncontrovertible that laws were changed by the Board of Elections without the state legislature. That happened. That is a fact.
Ergo what? Were votes changed?
Well, the issue is the laws were changed. And so what the Republicans are saying is, if laws are going to be changed unconstitutionally without the state legislature, because the state legislature controls voting, and they're elected by the people, and that's our democracy, then we've got to make sure that the people, the voice of the people, who is the state legislature, have that voice. And it's not, State Board of Elections usurping them.
The unconstitutionality of these changes is debatable. the election was fair and it was legal, the count was legal. DA Deberry, when we are looking at how district lines are drawn and representation throughout the state, where do you think race should play in terms of policies for drawing these lines?
Well, I have to agree with Councilman Middleton that, to now again say that race does not matter in the United States completely ignores our history. I think race plays a role. I think there is a way that we can draw maps that is fair, that represents every one of none of this is unknown. Plaintiffs in the redistricting case provided an expert who did computer-generated maps that met all of the requirements set out by the court. So it's not like we don't know how to do this, we do. And this continuing misinformation about votes being stolen or people not voting and where they're supposed to vote is to take away from the facts that we know how to do this. And we just, again, don't have the political will to do it.
DA Satana Deberry, Harold Eustache, Councilman Mark-Anthony Middleton, thank you so much for coming out and being a part of today's program.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to thank today's guests, and we invite you to engage with us on Twitter or Instagram using the hashtag Black Issues Forum. You can also find our full episodes on pbsnc.org/Black Issues Forum, or listen at any time on Apple iTunes, Spotify, or Google Podcasts. For Black Issues Forum, I'm Deborah Holt-Noel. Thanks for watching.
Quality public television is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting PBS NC.